Before anyone said a word I could actually understand, the air in the dining room went completely cold. I felt the shift in my shoulders first. In the span of a single sentence, the warmth in our own dining room turned into something genuinely eerie. My daughter's fiancé leaned toward his mother, dropping his voice into that easy private rhythm that only belongs to mothers and sons. I kept smiling, the kind of polite smile you wear when someone tells an inside joke you aren't part of. I had spent all evening pouring Napa Valley Cabernet, passing delicate plates, and watching my daughter, across the table, radiate happiness toward a man I had willingly welcomed into our family. My name is Joanna Kensington, and until that night, I thought I had a complete understanding of everyone sitting at my table. We had spent weeks preparing for this dinner. Julian and his mother, Valentina, had flown in from Buenos Aires to Atlanta. Before any actual wedding planning started, like picking out diamond rings, setting a date, or bringing in lawyers for a prenuptial agreement, this was supposed to be a formal evening for the two families to get to know each other. My husband, Harrison, insisted on hosting it at our estate in Buckhead, and every single detail had to be flawless. Harrison sat at the head of the long table, just like always. He was steady, observing much more than he spoke. It was the typical posture of a self-made man who had built a massive commercial real estate empire in Georgia and learned early on not to trust a room full of strangers too quickly. Through the sound of Spanish conversation, I saw the corners of Valentina's mouth curve into a smile that felt warm and effortless. It was the kind of laughter that makes you feel comfortable, even when you are shut out of the exchange. My daughter Genevieve, whom we all called Jen, laughed right along with her, even though she probably only caught 1 out of every 10 words. Jen was just genuinely happy for her future mother-in-law. I smiled too, half a beat behind, the way you do when you are matching the mood of the room rather than following the words. Then Julian said something even quieter, leaning in toward his mother as if the words were meant only for her ears. His mother's laughter suddenly turned sharp, the previous warmth hardening into something deeply unsettling. She gave a slow nod, as if she were agreeing to something much heavier than a simple joke. I didn't understand the Spanish words, but I understood the sound of a secret. The person who actually understood those words was Maria. Maria had managed my kitchen for 15 years. She is a quiet, steady Mexican-American woman. She has the kind of presence you tend to overlook because she always keeps everything running smoothly without ever demanding your attention. She placed the final main course down in front of Valentina with a steady hand, straightened up, and cleared her throat. It was a very small sound, but entirely deliberate. It was the sound of someone deciding to break a delicate balance. He said, Maria repeated, her crisp English cutting quietly across the entire dining room, "We just need to get the documents and the cash." She's not my type at all. Nobody moved. Jen's fork stopped mid-air. The smile on her face didn't fade. It simply went blank, as if a switch behind her eyes had been flipped off. Harrison quietly set his crystal wine glass down. That quiet gesture terrified me far more than if he had shattered it. Valentina's laughter was still hanging in the air, unfinished and looking foolish because it had nowhere to land. She looked up at Maria with the expression of someone watching a servant break a social rule that wasn't supposed to exist. Julian opened his mouth, but for one long second not a single syllable came out of his throat. Harrison was the first one to stand up. He didn't raise his voice. He never raised his voice when things actually mattered. It was the classic style of an old-school Southern patriarch. He looked at Julian first, then at Valentina, and said only one sentence. "Get out of my house now." I watched my daughter's fiancé scramble for words in a language he thought might protect him. I watched his mother grab her expensive Hermes handbag with hands that wouldn't quite stay steady. I watched Maria step back toward the kitchen doorway, as calm as ever, as if she hadn't just altered the trajectory of all our lives. The front door closed behind them, making a sound far too gentle for the devastation it represented. Jen's gaze never left that door for even a second. Not when Julian's rental SUV pulled away down the driveway, and not when I softly called her name. Even when I looked at her face and realized that what came next was no longer up to me, she kept staring right there. Porch. The silence in my house that night had a distinct sound to it. It was the kind of ringing silence that presses against your eardrums long after a door has shut. None of us left the dining room. Harrison stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows with his back to us, hands tucked into his dress pants, staring out at the dark lawn without saying a word. Porch. Jen sat right where she was, her food completely untouched, her eyes still locked on the space where the front door used to be. Suddenly, a phone buzzed on the table. All three of us flinched, as if the vibration had happened directly inside our chests. I glanced down. Valentina's name was lit up on the screen. Joanna, I hope we can talk about this soon like reasonable families. Porch. Misunderstandings happen all the time. Julian loves your daughter very much. I read the text twice, waiting for anger to be my first reaction. Instead, what hit me first was a pure, sharp sense of the absurd. How could a woman who had just laughed at her son's insult 40 minutes earlier type the word love as if nothing had happened? Hearing the buzz, Harrison turned around. Who is it? Porch. Valentina. I flipped my phone face down on the table, as if the device itself had done something wrong. She wants to talk, says it was all a misunderstanding. A low sound came from deep in Harrison's throat. Not a laugh, but full of contempt. Of course she does. I turned the phone back over, staring at the message with my thumb hovering over the screen. Porch. Replying to her would give her the satisfaction of knowing I still cared about her reaction. Ignoring her might make her think I was defensive, or give her room to keep pushing. But in the game of social power, when someone expects a reply, absolute silence is a devastating weapon. I had learned that a long time ago. So I purposely put the phone down without typing a single letter. Porch. Right then, I noticed Jen's phone light up too. She didn't touch it. It sat right beside her plate, glowing in the dim light. I didn't need to lean in to read the name, Julian. She didn't reach for it, didn't even turn her head. Porch. She just kept staring at the door, her jaw set so tightly that I knew she had felt the vibration before I even saw the screen light up, deciding in a fraction of a second to pretend she didn't notice. Jen? I asked softly. I'm fine. Her voice was entirely flat, showing way too much control for a girl whose world had supposedly collapsed 30 minutes ago. Harrison didn't push her. Porch. When Jen retreated into that closed-off, hyper-cautious state, he never pushed her, though I could tell how much it cost him to hold back. He walked over, kissed the top of her head, and told her to get some rest so we could talk in the morning. She gave an empty nod, not really hearing him at all. Porch. I stayed behind to clear the table, less out of care for the dishes and more because I needed something to do with my hands. A few minutes later, as I walked down the hallway, I caught sight of her on the stairs. Her phone was pressed tightly to her ear, her body angled away from the hallway light. Her voice kept so low I couldn't make out a single word. Porch. She saw me watching, but she didn't stop talking. She just turned slightly, using her shoulder to block me out, and kept going up. After she disappeared, I stood at the bottom of the stairs for a long time. My daughter's voice faded into her bedroom. She had already made her choice, choosing to take a call from the man her father had just thrown out of the house. Porch. Jen closed her bedroom door, sat on the edge of the bed, and put her phone in her lap, watching it ring. It was the second time that night Julian's name lit up her screen. She let it ring twice before answering, not out of hesitation, but because some deep part of her wanted him to feel the weight of that delay. Porch. Hey, he started, his voice soft and careful, the voice of a man who had rehearsed an apology. I've been trying to reach you. I saw. Jen, listen to me. What happened tonight is not what it sounds like. You know how words get twisted in translation. My mother laughs at everything, that's just her personality. It doesn't mean Maria's translation was accurate. Porch. Maria translated it word for word, Jen interrupted. The line went quiet. Not for long, but long enough for her to catch his panic. I wasn't talking about you like that. I was talking about some paperwork, family trust stuff. Everything got mixed up. She had wanted to believe him so badly. Porch. Wanting to believe the person you love isn't a weakness. It's just the instinct of love before it learns how to protect itself. So she let the silence stretch, waiting for him to fill the gap with something that actually made logical sense. The phone felt warm against her ear, and in the quiet room, she could hear the loud thumping of her own heartbeat. Porch. Instead of an apology, however, he filled the silence with a question that had nothing to do with being sorry. Is your dad still mad? I mean, is he mad enough to change any of the partnership structures on the commercial development project? Or was that just anger talking tonight? Jen froze instantly. Not because the question was loud or malicious, but because it was completely wrong. Porch. It came at the entirely wrong time, dressed up like concern while shaped like a cold surgical blade. She didn't answer right away. She let the question hang in the air for another second, rolling it over in her mind, waiting for the feeling of being foolish for noticing. He heard the suffocating silence and hurried his pace to cover it up. I'm just saying, I know families like yours. Porch. Business and family are tied together. You know, our wedding, our future. I just don't want your dad making a rash decision over one bad night. I'm just looking out for our future. Our future. Jen turned the phrase over in her mind and then set it aside, because putting it down was so much easier than holding on to it. Porch. I just want us to be okay. His voice grew softer, slipping back into that familiar, affectionate frequency. When things calm down, can we talk in person? I love you, Jen. That hasn't changed. She almost replied with an I love you too. But in the end, she only said, yeah, we'll talk. Porch. Because that was easier than dealing with the complex feelings stuck in her chest, and because a stubborn part of her still needed tonight to be just a misunderstanding rather than a cruel reality. Thank you, he sounded visibly relieved, the tension dropping right out of his voice. I'll call you tomorrow. Porch. She hung up and sat there for a moment, staring hard at the phone, as if waiting for it to explain everything on its own. The question about the business structure sat like a cold stone in her stomach, small and bizarre. Porch. It was like catching a shadow out of the corner of your eye. You almost want to point it out to someone, but you stay quiet, because once you say it out loud, the monster might actually be real. She thought about calling him right back and demanding an answer, but she didn't. Porch. She told herself there would be plenty of time later, once things calmed down and she understood her own unease well enough to give it a name. She didn't hear me push the door open. By the time she looked up, I was already standing in the doorway. From my expression alone, she knew I had heard enough. Porch. Not every word, but enough from her careful, guarded tone to know whose name had kept her awake past midnight. You've already made up your mind, Jen said, her voice carrying a sharp edge I hadn't heard in all 26 years of her life. Before he even opened his mouth tonight, you and Dad had already decided he wasn't good enough for our family, right? Porch. I stood in her doorway in my silk robe, letting her pour out her anger. Heavy grief needs an outlet, and I would rather have those emotions hurled at me than let them rot inside her. That's not true, I said. Isn't it? You stared at him all evening like you were waiting for him to mess up. Both of you. I could have told her that wasn't fair. Porch. I could have reminded her of what we all heard, and how straightforward Maria's translation was, leaving zero room for doubt. Yet another emotion rose from the bottom of my heart. Things I hadn't planned on saying, but once they started, I couldn't stop them. I was the one who wanted to invite them, I said. Your dad wasn't sure. He said we knew too little about Julian. Porch. Meeting the families this soon felt rushed. I was the one pushing for it. I liked him, Jen. I liked him before your dad ever accepted him. She froze. I hadn't planned on saying that. Not like this, and certainly not tonight. But it was the truth. As the words left my mouth, I realized I had been carrying this heavy guilt since the dinner ended, looking for somewhere to put it down. Orch. You liked him? She repeated, as if the words didn't fit together in her mouth. Yes, he was charming, thoughtful. He asked smart questions. I listened to my own words, realizing how thin and ridiculous they sounded against the truth we now knew. I told your dad he was being too suspicious. I made him give Julian a chance. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Orch. I watched something shift deep inside my daughter's eyes. The anger didn't vanish. It simply rearranged itself around a new shape. Then why? She began slowly. Do you sound like you regret it? I hadn't intended to answer that either, but tonight I didn't want to hide anything from her anymore. Because of one thing, I said, a small thing from a few weeks ago. Orch. Small enough that I kept trying to convince myself it didn't matter. Jen sat up straighter. What thing? I hesitated because speaking it out loud made it real, in a way it never had been when I thought about it privately. What did you even notice? She asked directly. Her voice carried no anger now, only a desperate craving for the truth. Orch. I realized this was the first real question she had asked me all night, not meant to defend him. I thought back to that dinner a few months ago. Long before Valentina booked her flight to the US, the four of us had dinner at an upscale Italian restaurant in Buckhead. Orch. Julian had leaned across the table with that easy, confident smile, casually asking your dad. As if making small talk about the equity structure of that new $200 million commercial real estate project downtown. He asked if only Harrison's name was on the documents, or if other family members were listed too. At the time, I hadn't thought much of it. Orch. Men always asked about their partner's father's business. It looked like polite interest rather than calculated strategy. He asked your dad, I said slowly, choosing my words, whose name actually owned the company, if it belonged solely to him, or if anyone else's name was listed beside it. I watched that question land on my daughter's face like a stone dropping into a calm lake. Orch. The ripples spread outward from the center, disturbing the surface long after the stone had settled on the bottom. Jen remembered that afternoon 2 weeks ago inside Julian's luxury apartment. The air had smelled faintly of cold black coffee. I only knew about this because, when the truth no longer needed hiding, Jen told me herself. Orch. That day he walked down the hallway to take a call from someone claiming to be a cousin. Jen sat alone on his couch. His MacBook was open on the coffee table, the screen still showing whatever he had been working on before she arrived. He never guarded himself around her. She had sat in that exact spot countless times, waiting for him to finish a shower, or come back upstairs with takeout food. Orch. People only leave their laptops wide open when they completely trust the person sitting next to them. She hadn't been looking for anything. She needed me to understand that. I believed her, because my daughter was never the kind of person to go through a man's private belongings. She just sat there waiting, scrolling through her own phone. Orch. Right then, his computer gave a crisp chime, and a notification slid down from the upper right corner of the screen. She didn't mean to read it. The truth was, anyone's eyes would instinctively follow a sound and movement. It was a name she didn't recognize. The message preview was cut off, showing only half a sentence. Regarding that wire transfer, Orch. Once the liquidation is complete. Below the name was a country code she didn't recognize at all. It wasn't Argentina, and it wasn't the US. It was the area code of some completely unrelated offshore financial center. She sat there without moving. It could have meant nothing. It could have been a cousin, a friend, a normal transaction with a perfectly valid business explanation. Orch. She told herself this immediately. The way people instinctively reach for rational explanations before they are ready to face bad news. Yet for a second before that, something inside her chest had turned cold and hyper-alert. No matter how much she told herself it was nothing, the tight feeling wouldn't loosen. She heard his voice getting closer down the hallway, finishing up the call. Orch. So she did something she had never done around him before. She started acting. She didn't close any windows, didn't touch anything. She just moved her eyes away from the screen, picked up her own phone, and put that soft, easy smile back on her face as if the last 30 seconds hadn't happened. Torch. Sorry about that, Julian said, dropping onto the couch beside her and casually snapping the laptop shut without even looking down. Just some family drama, you know. I know, she said. Her voice sounded light and natural, showing no cracks at all. After that, he chatted about trivial things for a bit. She nodded at the right moments, offered light laughs when appropriate. Torch. And the whole time, a newly awakened, detached version of herself sat right behind her eyes, taking frantic mental notes. She didn't ask who the name belonged to, didn't ask about the wire transfer or the country code, nothing at all. An instinct she couldn't yet put into words told her that asking questions would only teach him how to hide better. Torch. For the first time in their entire relationship, she discovered that her hunger for the truth was stronger than her desire for reassurance. Late that night, alone in her bedroom, she sat on the bed, closed her laptop, opened her phone, and hovered her thumb over the Safari search bar for a long time before finally typing his full name and hitting search. She didn't sleep much that night. By the next afternoon, she was right back at it. Sitting cross-legged on her bed, she opened the laptop and carefully typed in the name of the import-export company Julian claimed to run. The exact name he had casually mentioned to her father months ago at that Italian restaurant. So casually, she had never thought to question it. The page loaded slower than normal. She watched the little loading circle spin, feeling her pulse speed up right along with it. It felt strange, because she didn't even know what she was afraid of finding. Nothing. Well, not entirely nothing. A few scattered unrelated search results popped up, a shoe repair shop in Guadalajara, an abandoned blog. Nothing matched the large-scale import business he had described in such detail. And no office addresses matched the family business locations he had provided. A basic Google search wasn't enough to prove anything. For something this important, anyone could pay to scrub or clean their name online. Jen decided to use more professional methods. She was well-educated and knew where to find real records. She pulled up public business registries in Argentina and Florida. Those were official legal documents that couldn't just vanish into thin air. She patiently searched company names on the clunky foreign interface, then searched addresses. Finally, the system returned a real result. A business was registered at that address. The name was similar to his, but not exact. The last name had a slight spelling variation, and his given name was completely missing, replaced instead by a few initials. She stared at the screen for a long time, waiting for them to rearrange themselves into something that made sense. Her phone buzzed against her leg. "What are you up to?" "Julian?" 3 p.m, casual as always. Her thumb hovered over the screen. In that swaying second, she considered typing out what she was actually doing, imagining how his face would crumble, how he would explain, how he would lie. But a cautious voice in her head told her it wasn't time yet. It wasn't time to show her cards. "Just running some errands," she replied. "Talk later, miss you." She placed her phone face down on the bed and looked back at the screen. That mismatched name sat like a thorn stuck in her skin, confirmed now by an official record that didn't lie the way public relations websites did. She thought about calling him right then to demand an explanation. She remembered how easily he had brushed things off tonight with talk of translation errors, his voice growing impossibly steady when she needed it least. She suddenly realized that asking now wouldn't get her the truth. It would only get her another masterclass in performance. So, sitting in the dim glow of the screen, she made her decision. She wouldn't ask. She would watch, collect, and let him think everything was normal, while she quietly figured out what had changed. The decision cost her. She willingly discarded some old pure sense of trust inside herself, perhaps forever, but she did it anyway, and once the choice was made, She felt an unusual resolve she hadn't felt in days. She kept digging. During an open-source intelligence search, an old photo from years ago popped up on a mutual friend's social media page. In the picture, a younger Julian stood next to a Porsche she didn't recognize, and someone else had tagged him in the caption. The tag wasn't his name. It was a name she had never heard him use. Not with her, not with her father, not with anyone. Following the tag from the photo, she found an Instagram profile. That profile led her to a woman with gentle eyes who ran a wedding planning business outside Houston, Texas. Jen's thumb stayed on the send message button for a long time before she finally typed out a short, simple message. "Hi, I'm sorry to bother you out of the blue. I saw you tagged someone named Julian, or the name he went by back then, in an old photo years ago. I think you might have known him back then. If you don't mind, I have a quick question." She hit send, put her phone down, not expecting an immediate reply. At best, maybe a slow response in a few days. That wasn't what happened. Her phone buzzed within 4 minutes. "I don't know anyone by that name. You have the wrong person." Jen stared hard at the message, a mix of tension and confusion tightening in her chest. 4 minutes. She looked back at the photo. The tag was clear as day. It was a caption the woman had written herself years ago using her own account. This wasn't some random stranger stumbling across a weird message. This was someone who opened the notification, read it, and replied at lightning speed, leaving no time for thought or hesitation. She replied carefully, "I understand. I'm sorry to bother you. I just wanted to ask." The message wouldn't go through. She tried again. A red exclamation mark popped up next to the text. When she tapped the woman's name, the profile that had existed 30 seconds ago was completely gone. No photos, no bio, nothing left to click. She had been blocked. Jen sat very quietly with the phone in her hand. She felt the confusion in her chest rearrange into something much sharper. It wasn't panic. It was a cold kind of clarity. A woman who genuinely didn't know a man didn't need to fire back a reply in 4 minutes. She didn't need to block a stranger who only asked a polite, harmless question. People with clear consciences don't run away that fast to avoid a question that poses no threat. She sat thinking for a long time, turning the thought over like a rock to see what was hiding underneath. If none of this meant anything, silence cost nothing. Silence was free. Blocking someone wasn't. Blocking took effort and a decision. It meant judging in real time that the conversation was dangerous and needed to be cut off completely, right then and there. She remembered what her mother had told her about that question regarding company equity from dinner months ago. A tiny detail meant to be forgotten, yet sticking in her throat upon reflection. The feeling now was identical, a minor misstep, yet impossible to find a clean explanation for no matter how hard she tried. Before she even fully made up her mind, she opened the screenshot tool. The initial chat, the 4-minute reply, the red exclamation mark, the vanished profile. She captured and saved every single piece of evidence while it still existed. A gut feeling warned her that evidence like this had a way of vanishing into thin air if you weren't fast enough. For the next few days, nothing happened. It was a suffocating kind of calm. Out of habit, Jen checked the deactivated Instagram page with obsessive daily repetition, less out of hope and more to confirm that everything from that night hadn't been a hallucination. Half of her mind had already decided that this trail was cut off permanently, just like the profile that vanished. During those days, she had to keep playing the part of the deeply in love fiancé. She smiled while listening to him talk about the future during lunch at an upscale spot in Ponce City Market, and she kept a straight face while watching him try to smooth things over, with her father Harrison back at the Buckhead estate. Every held hand and every kiss made a part of her soul scream to pull away, yet she forced that impulse down with incredible willpower. About a week later, late at night and almost by some strange coincidence, a notification slid down her screen from a completely different account. She didn't know the account name, but the tiny profile picture unmistakably belonged to the woman from Houston. A different angle, a different hairstyle, but definitely the same person. Orch. It was the kind of secret backup account people keep hidden away for moments just like this. A new Instagram story had just been posted. It would vanish automatically in 24 hours. No extra pictures, no long accusations. Just a stark white line of text set against a solid black background. Some men don't deserve warnings twice. Orch. Jen read the sentence 3 times before hitting the screenshot button. This time her hand stayed completely steady, unlike the shaking she felt when she first stumbled onto the truth days prior. 2 days after that, she found the second woman. This discovery was even more hidden. Orch. It came through tracking down the old Argentine friends listed on Julian's Facebook likes, following the trail step by step. The photo was older, grainy from an older phone camera, clearly pulled from an account that hadn't seen an update in over a year. It had been taken at a yacht party in Miami, Florida. Julian stood next to a blonde woman whose arm was wrapped familiarly around him. Orch. Both looked younger and both were smiling. That smile, especially the look Julian gave the camera, was chillingly identical to the adoring look he gave Jen now, as if she were the center of the universe. The caption below the photo didn't use the modified last name from the business registry, nor did it use the fake name from the first photo. The tag gave his real full name, Julio Aranda. Orch. It was the same name he had given Jen when they first met. Jen's thumb hovered over the send button for a long time. After dealing with the defensive wall the Houston woman threw up in 4 minutes, a new sense of caution had taken root inside her. She didn't want to burn another trail the same way. This time, she kept her words brief and left an easy out. Hi, I don't mean to alarm you. Orch. But I think we might have crossed paths with the same man at different points in time. If you're open to it, I have a few questions. If not, absolutely no pressure, sorry to disturb you. She put down her phone, forcing herself to stand up and walk to the kitchen to brew a cup of chamomile tea, finding anything to keep her from staring at the screen. Nearly an hour later, the phone buzzed. Orch. Who are you? Why are you asking this? Not an immediate block, but a question, full of wariness, yet leaving the door cracked open rather than slamming it shut. My name is Jen. I live in Atlanta now. I suspect I am currently going through what you went through. The reply took longer this time. Orch. For several long minutes, Jen sat motionless, watching the 3 little gray dots representing the other person typing appear, disappear, and reappear twice before a full long message finally came through. How did this start for you? Before you tell me anything, you tell me your situation. Orch. Jen chose her words carefully as she typed, sketching out an outline, without mentioning the Kensington family wealth, without mentioning her father's commercial empire, focusing only on the trajectory. She described how fast Julian's advance was, how attentive he was, and how effortlessly he spoke of a future they hadn't yet earned the right to plan. Orch. This time, the woman's reply arrived almost instantly, as if certain details in Jen's answer instantly unlocked her memory's defenses. That is my exact opening, almost word for word. The tight string in Jen's chest suddenly loosened, yet was simultaneously gripped hard by an invisible hand. Relief and bone-chilling fear arrived together, intertwining until they were impossible to tell apart. Orch. She wasn't overthinking. She wasn't overreacting. Now, on the other end of the line, a second person confirmed it all. This meant it was no longer just suspicion, no longer a communication gap or a cultural difference. It was a carefully orchestrated scam pattern. Can we talk? I mean a real call, not typing, Jen asked. Okay, the woman replied, I'll call you tonight. Orch. Jen placed her phone on the marble island, her hands trembling in a way entirely different from before. This wasn't fear, but a shudder similar to standing at the edge of a dark room whose size you don't yet know. Before the ringtone sounded, another text popped up, a short line that made Jen sit straight up. Orch. Before we talk, I need you to tell me exactly how long it took him to propose meeting your family." The call connected. For a moment, neither of them spoke. There was only the faint static of the line and the sound of two women breathing at opposite ends. Both were facing a vast, undefined abyss. "Orch. Hello?" The woman finally broke the silence, her voice carrying that light Florida accent, though kept very low now. "I'm Jen." The woman took a deep breath. "So, how long did it take him to ask to meet your family?" Jen felt the question strike precisely beneath her ribs. 3 months. At the 3-month mark, he said it felt like everything was right. Orch. He said he didn't want to waste time on something already certain. The other end fell into a suffocating silence, lasting so long Jen almost asked if she was still there. 3 months, the woman repeated softly. Mine was 10 weeks. Almost the exact same words. I don't want to waste time. Jen closed her eyes in pain. Orch. He told me, Jen's voice tightened, that his family ran a massive import-export business in Argentina, that his father built the commercial empire from scratch, and that he was the rightful heir. He painted a grand picture of multinational meetings and shipping containers. A short, humorless, dry laugh came through the phone. He told me the exact same thing. Orch. Except for one thing. Once I asked to FaceTime him at his office in Buenos Aires or check out his father's company headquarters. That week, there were always flawless excuses why the video call couldn't happen. "Did he ever ask about your family's money?" Jen asked, her throat feeling as dry as sand. "Not directly." The woman's pace picked up, laced with post-realization anger. Orch. He asked a lot of tiny questions, extremely natural ones. Like what my parents did for work, whether our house was bought outright or had a mortgage, what year my trust fund was set up, and whether I had brothers who might inherit before me. Her voice grew tighter. I didn't think much of it at the time. It felt like getting to know me, like planning our future finances. Orch. Jen felt a lump in her throat. Before we got engaged, he asked my father who the major shareholders of his company were, what the ownership structure was, and whose name was on the documents. Jen? The woman said her name carefully, as if choosing to entrust her with something extremely fragile. I need you to know that he has done this many times before. Orch. No matter how you feel right now, maybe confused, maybe still trying to convince yourself you overreacted, you didn't. The cool control Jen had maintained cracked for the first time upon hearing those words. An unsuppressed, unsteady gasp escaped her lips. "I'm sorry." The woman's voice softened deeply with empathy. "I know how bad this feels. Orch. 18 months ago, I was sitting in the exact same spot you are. What finally happened between you?" I started asking questions he didn't like. About the gaps in his background, his unverified schedule. He grew cold, distant. Then one day he was gone. No argument, no breakup, nothing. In less than a week, he blocked me on every platform. He just vanished from Miami. Orch. Jen pressed her palm flat against her chest, trying to steady her racing heart. She was examining a monster that refused to be looked at. During your relationship, did you ever find out anything about his past? Before he came to the US? The woman was silent for a moment. Early on, after a few martinis, he got a little drunk. Orch. He casually dropped something about trouble back home. I asked what kind. He sobered up instantly, wrapping up the conversation fast. He said it was nothing, just some internal family tax dispute, and never brought it up again. I chose to let it go because I wanted to believe him so badly. Orch. Tell me more, Jen blurted out, surprised by how steady her voice sounded as grief and fierce clarity fought for the same breath. Please, any detail you remember. The woman exhaled slowly on the other end. Orch. He didn't leave South America because he wanted to expand his business to the US. The woman gave her a specific Spanish term to search for, adding, it was a term he mentioned years ago when he slipped up. After hanging up, Jen's battle began. The first night of searching yielded nothing. Orch. Jen sat in bed, using Google Translate to parse Spanish news archives from Argentina and South America sentence by sentence until 2 in the morning. Dead end after dead end. A football bribery scandal using the same Spanish term but a different meaning. A 10-decade-old political report unrelated to him. Page after page looped back to the start. Torch. That night, she closed her laptop with nothing to show for it except a splitting headache and that unresolved Spanish phrase spinning in her head. The second night, she narrowed her scope. She added a specific city the woman had mentioned and a rough date range based on when the trouble might have occurred before he fled. This search surfaced a name remarkably similar to Julian's. Torch. A man summoned for questioning in a fraud case, but the photo was wrong. Older, heavier, clearly a different person with the same name. Another dead end. Another hour wasted tracking a stranger's face. Not until late on the third night, a full week after she started searching, did the digital archive of a smaller South American regional news outlet finally load a page of real weight. Torch. The page crawled slowly. She stared at the creeping blue progress bar, her body stiffening in anticipation of its heavy verdict. Then, the headline translated into English beneath the original text: Real estate investment scam. Multiple families lose heavy down payments on never-existent off-plan projects. Torch. The report noted that a man fled the country quietly after initial questioning by local prosecutors, before formal criminal charges could be filed. Beneath the headline was a photograph. Younger, with a different hairstyle. But those eyes, the jawline structure, and that signature slight tilt of the head when facing the camera. Torch. No matter the passing years or all the aliases in the world, Jen would have recognized him anywhere. The last trace of doubt she had clung to, that small, stubborn hope praying, it was all a giant misunderstanding, died completely. There was no hysterical breakdown. It simply stopped beating, like a breath finally let out. The news article clearly described how the scam operated. Torch. It exploited trust account loopholes, using VIP internal subscriptions as bait to steal victim funds. The article referred to one victim only by initials, a woman whose down payment was never returned, her case left indefinitely pending after the suspect fled the country. Torch. Because it was an international case with no extradition treaty and no international arrest warrant, the trail went dead the moment he crossed the border. Torch. Just as she now understood, once he got what he wanted from the Kensington family. Perhaps funding for the development project or legal status and property division through marriage. He intended to vanish from this family just as he had years ago. The iPhone beside her lit up. I can't sleep either. My head is full of you. Would love to hear your voice. Julian. Torch. The tone was warm, casual, carrying that perfect boyfriend vibe that once intoxicated her. He had no idea that right now, sitting in a dark room miles away, his own face was staring coldly back at her from a translated fraud file on her MacBook screen. 3 full nights of painful searching finally settled in this moment. She stared at the text. Torch. The old version of her would have felt a pang of guilt and pity reading that he suffered insomnia from missing her. That version of Jen, however, had died after that dinner. Can't sleep either. Work was too exhausting tonight. She typed back in a calm, unhurried tone fitting his expectations. Get some rest early. Love you. Torch. She placed her phone face down on the table, ignoring the lie of love you, and turned her focus back to the glowing article. The man in the photo had done this before. He was repeating it now, and he had no idea the American family he targeted this time had a daughter capable of unrooting him in the dark. No matter how long it took, what she had now was enough. Torch. Enough to show her parents, enough to stop passive observation, and start striking back. Jen leaned back against the headboard, the dim screen glow the room's only light. She realized with astonished clarity. The fear that had weighed on her chest since the dinner had quietly drifted away, shifting elsewhere. She wasn't afraid of him anymore. She was ready to hunt him down. Torch. The next morning, Jen walked downstairs carrying a manila folder. The signature exhaustion and confusion of the past few weeks were entirely gone from her face. Her spine was straight, her posture carrying no tears or self-pity. Torch. She walked to the spacious kitchen island, placing the folder between Harrison's and my coffee cups, with the steady confidence of someone laying down a long-held trump card on the table. "I need both of you to sit down," Jen began, her voice completely even, "and I need you to let me finish before saying anything." Harrison slowly set down his black coffee, eyeing her with the sharp gaze he reserved for business rivals. It was his habitual prelude to taking control of a room. I pulled out a bar stool and sat in silence. She opened the folder, spreading out the materials like a well-prepared prosecutor stating her case. Screenshots, the testimony record from the Florida woman, carefully omitting her full name, referring to her only as someone who knew him in the past, and the translated South American news report. A younger Julio Aranda staring coldly from the printout. She also pointed out the modified last name he used to hide his tracks and the non-existent family import-export empire. As each page turned, I watched my husband's jawline tighten. I could feel a dangerous fury forming inside him, a reaction I knew intimately from decades of marriage. Harrison always displayed this terrifying dead silence before losing patience. "Enough," Harrison interrupted when Jen reached the fraud report, his voice dropping low like crushed glass in his throat. "That's more than enough. I'm calling the Atlanta Police Department chief tonight." "Dad, wait." "Wait for what?" "Jen, you just showed me files on a man with an international fraud rap sheet, and this bastard is sitting at our dinner table. That's a case without a formal indictment or international warrant." Jen's voice remained astonishingly steady, though I could tell maintaining it cost her dearly. "If we go to the police now with a translated article and second-hand testimony, it accomplishes nothing except alarming him. We'll hand him the time to vanish again before anyone can build a legally binding case, crossing the border before we can stop him." Harrison turned to look at me, expecting my support in his blazing anger as usual. I didn't speak immediately. That silence communicated my stance far clearer than words. "I've consulted a lawyer," Jen continued. "Just an initial consultation, no formal filing yet." She explained our actual legal leverage versus what we lack. "There is a correct way to handle this, and we cannot let him slip through legal loopholes by moving too fast." A surge of powerful emotion rose in my chest. Not fear at all, but an indescribable pride. My daughter, who 3 weeks ago covered her ears to avoid hearing a single bad word about this man, sat before us like a chess player thinking 4 moves ahead. Harrison exhaled heavily through his nose, his combat instincts searching for an outlet, but finding none against Jen's formidable composure. "You know all this, yet you're asking me to hold fire. I'm asking you to trust me completely on this, and let me take the lead." Silence lingered in the kitchen long enough for me to hear the faint hum of the Sub-Zero compressor. Then Harrison gave a decisive nod. It was the concession of a man accustomed to giving orders when faced with a superior strategy. "Fine," he said. "We do it your way. But I need to know every step." "You will." Jen closed the folder. For a second, I thought the conversation was over. "One last thing," she said, looking past us toward the floor-to-ceiling windows. "I need to see him one more time." The Midtown Atlanta law firm smelled of fresh printer ink and the suffocating composure unique to rooms delivering bad news year-round. The female attorney who greeted us was younger than I expected, with sharp eyes. Wasting no empty reassurance, she cut straight to the point. "I want to be transparent from the start," she said, opening the file before her, "because truth is always more useful than false hope. Based on the evidence shown, under Georgia jurisdiction, your family is not a direct victim of any prosecutable theft. You have suffered no material loss, no money changed hands, no property was transferred, and he gained nothing tangible by fraud from this house." Harrison leaned forward sharply. "He walked into my house with the clear intent to prey on my daughter. Isn't that enough?" Intent alone without a completed criminal act is exceptionally difficult to prosecute. The attorney's tone was gentle yet uncompromising about the legal reality. The evidence you hold is compelling, but it isn't enough to bring direct theft or fraud charges against him here. I watched my husband's hands grip the leather armrests tightly. The frustration of unvented rage was palpable. The law refused to move at the speed of his anger. "So what do we have right now?" Jen asked. Undiscouraged, her practical mindset had already bypassed our disappointment to seek solutions. The attorney turned to her with a flicker of appreciation in her eyes. "You have something very valuable, just not in the form you hoped. The evidence you gathered perfectly corroborates the allegations made by the woman in Florida. It massively strengthens the evidentiary chain for her interstate wire fraud case." She paused, dropping another bombshell. "Additionally, there's the matter of his immigration status you uncovered. Overstayed visa, entry under false pretenses. We can report that independently to the federal government. It won't slap handcuffs on him tonight, but it initiates a federal process he cannot talk his way out of. So he won't face punishment for what he tried to do to us," Harrison gritted out, "only for visa paperwork and someone else's case." "That is how the law operates right now," the attorney said. "I know it's unsatisfactory." Jen digested this quietly. I watched her turn the legal limitation over in her mind before setting it down firmly, choosing effective weapons over emotional outbursts. "One more thing," the attorney added, "depending on your next steps. Georgia is a one-party consent state. This means as long as you are a party to the conversation, you can legally record it without the other party's knowledge or consent." Jen's body stiffened instantly. "This doesn't apply to secondhand info gathered previously. But from now on, if you want any conversation legally recorded as supporting evidence of intent, it is entirely within your rights." I saw a transformation behind my daughter's eyes. Something quiet and resolute fell into place alongside an already made decision. "If I get him to say those intentions out loud again," Jen turned slowly to look at me, "it becomes a legal record, right?" "Legally speaking, yes. As long as you are part of the dialogue." "Then how do I get him to say it again without realizing?" she asked quietly. "Julio, still calling himself Julian, chose the restaurant. It was the upscale French restaurant inside the St. Regis in Buckhead, the site of their third date. When Jen walked in, he stood to pull out her chair, exuding an easy confidence. It was the posture of a man convinced the worst crisis had passed. "You look stunning," he said, sitting back down to take her hand across the table. "I missed all of this. Missed you." "I missed you too," Jen smiled, letting him hold her hand. Her iPhone lay face down beside her water glass, silently recording the air between them. They ordered food. He chatted lightly about trivia, mentioning how much his mother cared about her and hoping this would blow over soon, saying families always forgave each other in the end. Jen patiently played along, waiting for him to walk toward the door she set up. "I've been thinking about our wedding," he leaned in closer, dropping his voice. "Once your dad cools down. I don't want everything we planned to stall." "What exactly did we plan?" she asked softly, striking the right balance of curiosity and casualness without a hint of testing. "You know, having it here, doing it right, so nobody can question our relationship later." He smiled defenselessly. "With you, I never wanted shortcuts. I want everything clean and legitimate. As long as your family gives us a real chance, everything can be perfect." She let a tiny pause hang in the air. In the past, he would have rushed to fill that silence. Sure enough, he did now. "Look, I know what my mom said that night sounded bad. But you have to understand, timing matters more than people realize to me. I was anxious then, said something stupid to my mom, and it got completely twisted." "Then what did you really mean?" Jen stared into his eyes. "About timing." He hesitated slightly, reaching for his water glass without answering right away. "Just, when a family already has established assets, things are much easier. Like stability, resources to use as a springboard." I never dared say those words out loud because it sounds worse than reality. But wanting a better life isn't a crime, right? "No," Jen said calmly. "That's not a crime. unless you're using people to achieve it. Something crossed his face. True panic for the first time all night. Arch. He recovered instantly, masking it with a laugh and reaching for her hand again. I would never use you, Jen. I love you. She let him hold her hand for one final second. She deeply imprinted the moment in her mind. Even now, such lies rolled off his tongue effortlessly. Then, she pulled her hand back gently and firmly. I think I got everything I needed, she said. Everything you need? Orch. For what? The smile finally froze on his face. Jen stood up, picked up her phone, and firmly tapped the screen to stop the recording. Her gaze never left his face for a second. Goodbye. Julio? She turned and walked out of the opulent restaurant without looking back to catch the expression of realization dawning on him. Orch. His real name was spoken by her lips one last time, light as wind, amounting to nothing. Nearly 4 months passed after that restaurant encounter. 4 months of flat days, slow enough to almost make one forget we were still waiting. Until the knock finally echoed on an ordinary Tuesday morning. Aside from its outcome, that morning was ordinary in every respect. Orch. DeAndre knelt stiffly on the polished marble floor. He scrambled forward, grabbing the hem of my white trousers. Jada, please, you can't do this to me, DeAndre sobbed, his voice breaking into pitiful whimpers. You have to tell them I was manipulated. Jasmine played me for a fool. She used her pregnancy to cloud my judgment. Orch. She told me you'd never give me a child, making me believe I had to steal your assets to protect our bloodline. I was just a pawn in her and Liam's sick game. Please, Jada, you have to protect me. The shamelessness of his cowardly plea sickened the air. An adult man, to save his own skin, willing to throw his sister-in-law under the bus. Orch. Jasmine stormed into the lobby, hands on hips, her maternity dress looking absurd against the backdrop of an active federal crime scene. She had no intention of letting DeAndre control the narrative. Don't you dare pin this on me? You broke failure, Jasmine screamed, venom dripping from her voice. You wanted to play the big provider, but you couldn't even lease the Porsche I drove around in. Orch. You begged me for a child, because standing next to Jada made you feel like less of a man. You forged those loan documents because you were terrified I'd leave you for a guy with actual money. I didn't manipulate you, DeAndre. You were just stupid enough to believe you could afford me. DeAndre dropped my trousers, staring up at Jasmine with a trembling chin. Orch. The woman he destroyed his marriage for stood in the church lobby, publicly castrating his manhood and confirming he was nothing more than a convenient financial ATM. The ultimate golden girl finally dropped her mask, exposing the superficial core our mother instilled in her. The lead detective closed the blue folder and motioned to 2 uniformed officers assisting the federal agents. Orch. I shifted my attention back to Chloe. She had stopped screaming and was now sobbing hysterically. Leaning weakly against the kitchen counter, she slid down the cabinetry until sitting collapsed on the floor. Orch. Pulling her knees to her chest, her outrageously expensive designer leather dress crumpled around her legs, and her thick Cartier gold necklace looked absurd and ironic against the backdrop of her total ruin. Looking up at me with black mascara streaking her cheeks, she asked what she was going to do now. Orch. She asked how she was supposed to live without Brad's income, without unlimited credit cards, without the luxury lifestyle she fought so desperately to maintain. I looked down at my sister, the golden girl, pampered from childhood, who spent her whole life trying to make me feel small and insignificant. I told her the cold corporate world didn't care about her lifestyle preferences. Orch. I explained that when a company enters hostile takeover due to massive criminal fraud, creditors never stop at seizing commercial assets. We ruthlessly pursue absolutely everything tied to personal financial guarantees. I told her federal investigators would scrutinize every luxury purchase she made over the past 3 years. Orch. The brand new white Mercedes, parked in the driveway, those ultra-expensive designer handbags in her closet, the sky-high jewelry around her neck. All bought with stolen investor funds, all facing immediate seizure and forced liquidation. The absolute reality of her situation hit Chloe like a speeding freight train. Arch. Burying her face in her hands, she let out a loud, agonizing wail that pierced the quiet house. Brad remained motionless at the dining table. Slowly lifting his head, he looked at me with dead eyes utterly devoid of hope. He knew he faced a lengthy prison stretch in federal lockup. He knew his reputation in tech was permanently and totally annihilated. Arch. He knew he had nothing of value left to offer a family that once worshipped him like a god. He was a ghost wandering the ruins of his own life, and I was the one who wrote his epitaph. My father, DeAndre, still clutching his chest, drew a shaky breath trying to assemble a coherent sentence. He looked at me, his eyes filled with humble begging for a flicker of light in this suffocating dark. Arch. He asked what they were supposed to do now. He asked how they were going to keep the family home, how they would survive without the $200K they stupidly handed over to Brad. He looked at the senior partner running a multi-billion-dollar private equity fund, finally and desperately recognizing my absolute value. Arch. He finally realized the daughter he discarded like trash was the only true titan in this room. The execution was complete, and the absolute power I held over their future was unquestionable. Yet DeAndre stood there panting heavily, expecting me to throw him a lifeline. He naively thought I would revert to the desperate daughter, always craving his validation. Arch. He thought that now I had the power to save him, I would automatically play the role of the beautiful savior. Before I could answer his pathetic plea, Chloe struggled up from the hardwood floor. The reality of impending poverty only short-circuited her brain briefly. Her deeply ingrained narcissism refused to keep her down. Arch. Wiping away the smudged mascara to leave ugly black streaks across her face, she smoothed her ruined luxury leather dress and looked at me with a bizarre, twisted expression, mixing utter despair and arrogant entitlement. Pointing a trembling finger at me, she demanded I fix this situation immediately. Her voice was sharp, utterly lacking genuine remorse. Arch. She said since I was a senior partner at this massive private equity fund, I had the absolute power to make Brad's problems disappear instantly. She ordered me to press a single button on a computer to erase toxic risk debt. She casually minimized Brad's multi-million-dollar severe criminal fraud as an exaggerated minor accounting error. Arch. Looking at me with manic eyes, she claimed protecting her marriage and lifestyle was my fundamental duty as her sister. With breathtaking audacity, she accused me of holding a grudge over a dinner bill at a steakhouse, calling me selfish and petty. Arch, she demanded. I signed the Pay Nova rights back to Brad immediately and used my firm's billions to buy off federal regulators so they could return to their perfect, wealthy lives. I stared at her quietly, marveling at the scale of her delusion. Arch. She literally stood amid shattered crystal glass and spilled wine, begging me to commit serious federal financial felonies to save a white-collar con man who just bankrupted her parents. She cared nothing for the law, nothing for morality, and certainly nothing for the painful damage she caused my son Jamal. She only cared about keeping her shiny white Mercedes and country club membership. Arch. My mother Brenda, seeing Chloe's insane demands, rushed to support her golden girl. The family matriarch, who spent the past 30 years putting me down, suddenly decided it was time to play the family-first emotional card. Walking up to me with arms crossed tightly over her chest and tears streaming down her face, she tried to reach for my arm. Arch. I took a slow, deliberate step back, forcing her to maintain distance. Dropping her hands, she began pleading using manipulation tactics perfected over my entire lifetime. She told me God gave me this massive wealth and corporate power for a specific, sacred reason. She said I was chosen to be their financial savior in the family's darkest hour. Arch. Crying about the sprawling suburban mansion she spent decades decorating, she warned that if I didn't step in, the bank would throw my father and her onto the street. She claimed $200K was pocket change to a woman in my position and demanded I write them a check today to pay off that secondary mortgage. Torch. She kept her eyes fixed on Brad, who was still slumped motionless in his chair, and then turned back to me. She told me that Brad was family, and that family must always stand together against the outside world. Torch. She begged me to forgive his minor mistakes, telling me I had a profound moral obligation to fix this massive disaster because I was finally in a position to give back to the family and prove I was a loving, good daughter. I listened quietly as she finished her pathetic, manipulative speech. Torch. I let the silence stretch indefinitely, letting the absolute hypocrisy of her words hang heavily over the warm air of the dining room. The scent of roasted Thanksgiving turkey and macaroni and cheese felt sickening against the backdrop of their toxic greed. I looked at my mother and my sister, feeling not a single ripple of emotion inside me. Only a cold, clinical detachment. Torch. The emotional scars they had carved into me over the past 30 years were completely cauterized by the cold reality of my absolute power. I told my mother her definition of family was the most twisted and sickening concept I had ever encountered. I kept my voice perfectly even, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing me angry or out of control. Torch. I laid out in precise detail the 30 years of systematic emotional abuse I had endured under her roof. I reminded her of every single time she pushed me aside to elevate Chloe. I brought up the nights they mocked my career choices, laughed at my struggles as a single mother, and treated me like a second-class citizen in my own home. Torch. I told them they spent decades building a rigid caste system where I was always at the bottom, existing solely to serve as a convenient scapegoat for their deep-seated insecurities. Then, I turned my attention to the core issue that pushed us to this absolute moment of destruction. I stared straight into my mother's terrified eyes and pointed out their unforgivable crime at Prime Cut Steakhouse. Torch. I told her she and my father sat in an ultra-luxurious private dining room, watching a grown man intentionally deny food to a 9-year-old child. I told them they watched Brad push a basket of cold, complimentary dinner rolls toward my beautiful, innocent boy, while they greedily sliced into $180 Wagyu steaks, topped with gold leaf. And instead of protecting their black grandson, they laughed. Torch. They joined in the cruel humiliation because they were so desperately eager to attach themselves to Brad's supposed white wealth. I pointed a firm, unshakable finger at my father, DeAndre, who was leaning heavily against the wall trying to steady his breathing. Torch. I told him he had staked his entire life savings and the roof over his head on a man who despised our race to his core while violently loving our dollars. I explained that Brad didn't respect them. He didn't view them as equal adults. Torch. He saw them as naive, easily swindled marks, blinded by their own internal racial inferiority and desperate desire for social validation, willingly handing over their retirement funds without asking a single intelligent financial question. Torch. DeAndre Williams, the lead detective said, his voice echoing with absolute finality. The police are taking you in to assist with the investigation regarding corporate forgery and grand larceny. Stand up and put your hands behind your back. The officers yanked DeAndre up, twisting his arms back to snap on the steel handcuffs. He stared at me with eyes full of pleading terror. Torch. He was still waiting for me to use my wealth to save him, to clean up the mess he made. I stood straight, looking at this broken, barren man who had tried to steal my empire. I offered him no sympathy. You wanted a brand new life, DeAndre, I said, my voice cold and smooth. You just got everything you asked for. Torch. I turned my back on him as the officers escorted him through the heavy glass doors of Jubilee Baptist Church. His desperate pleas faded into the chaotic noise of the foyer, completely drowned out by the harsh reality of his own making. I didn't spare him a single backward glance. My attention shifted back to the sanctuary, where the ultimate architect of this disaster stood. Torch. Brenda remained frozen on the high altar, The bright red dress symbolizing her power and prestige as chief deaconess now made her a glaring target for the absolute disgust radiating from the pews. This massive sanctuary was no longer a place of worship for her. It was a courtroom, and the jury of her peers had just delivered a unanimous, unforgivable verdict. I slowly walked back down the center aisle. The prominent women of her elite sorority, the ladies who had been sipping expensive afternoon tea in my mother's living room just yesterday, were aggressively grabbing their designer bags and standing up. I watched the alumni president whisper sternly in her husband's ear, pulling her family far away from Brenda's section, as if my mother carried a highly contagious virus. Whispers merged into a loud, undeniable hum echoing off the vaulted ceilings. They were tearing her apart, condemning a woman who actively helped destroy her successful daughter's life financially and emotionally just to cover up a cheap scam. The flawless image of an upper-class matriarch she spent a lifetime building was rapidly turning to ash before her eyes. Watching her social empire crumble completely, Brenda stumbled down the velvet steps of the altar. Her footing faltered, expensive high heels tripping on the thick red carpet. She lunged at me, completely ignoring the fact that Jasmine was still sobbing by the communion table, abandoned by everyone. Brenda grabbed my wrist, her manicured nails digging painfully into my flesh. The usual haughty demeanor was completely stripped from her face, replaced by raw, pathetic terror. "Jada, you have to fix this," Brenda cried, her voice echoing wildly through the empty space. "You have to tell everyone. It's a misunderstanding. I'm your mother. You can't leave me in this disgrace. They'll ruin me in this city. You have to protect this family." I looked down at her hand, trembling against the tailored fabric of my white suit. I didn't push her away right away. I let everyone in the first 5 rows see clearly just how desperate she had become. I wanted the church elders to witness her begging. "You lost the right to call yourself my mother a long time ago," I said, my voice cutting cleanly through the murmur of the crowd. I stared hard into her eyes, pulling a specific memory from the dark corner I had buried for nearly 20 years. When I was 16, working 2 jobs just to afford my own high school textbooks because you drained my savings to pay for Jasmine's elite pageant coaching, you looked me straight in the face. You told me I would never belong in this family because I lacked the charm to elevate our social standing. I leaned closer, dropping my voice to an ice-sharp tone that pierced her panic. "You were right. I am too much for this family. I am too smart, too resourceful, and far too powerful to be dragged down by a family of parasitic con artists." I smoothly pulled my wrist away from her desperate grip and smoothed down my jacket. Before Brenda could launch into another hysterical plea, the steady footsteps of the senior pastor approached from the side aisle. Flanked by the head of the deacon board and the church finance committee chair. Their faces were carved from stone. Brenda turned to face them, a flicker of fleeting, desperate hope flashing across her face. She reached out to the pastor, automatically slipping back into her routine as a pious, loyal servant. She thought she could still manipulate the clergy. "Pastor, please," Brenda sobbed, pressing her hands together in a dramatic prayer pose. "The enemy is attacking my family today. We need the church to surround us with grace. We need prayer to cast out this spirit of division and heal our home." The pastor did not reach out to take her hand. His arms were crossed tightly behind his back, his expression a mask of deep, unyielding disappointment. "This is not a spiritual attack, Brenda," the pastor said, his voice carrying the heavy weight of absolute pastoral authority. "This is the fruit of the bitter seeds you chose to plant. You stood in this sacred altar and lied to the entire congregation. You used the sanctuary as a sacred space to orchestrate the theft of your own daughter's livelihood. You mocked our prayers simply to cover up the criminal enterprise your son-in-law operated." Brenda gasped, staggering backward as if slapped across the face. The total rejection by the highest spiritual and social authority in her circle hit her harder than any legal threat ever could. The pastor had not yet delivered his final verdict. Porch. When federal agents were in our foyer, the deacon board held an emergency vote. The pastor continued, his tone offering no room for negotiation or appeal. We cannot allow someone with such a severe lack of moral integrity to hold any leadership role within these walls. Porch. We are asking you to resign from the deaconess board, the building fund committee, and the women's ministry, effective immediately. We also ask that you and Jasmine gather your belongings and leave this place. Brenda let out a heavy, choked sound from the throat. Porch. She scanned the massive sanctuary, frantically searching the thousands of faces she spent decades trying to please for a single sympathetic look. Every single person averted their eyes, dodging her gaze. She collapsed heavily onto the wooden pew, burying her face in her hands as a loud, agonizing wail burst from her throat. Porch. Real estate, money, legal threats, none of it mattered to her in this moment. The pastor had publicly cut her ties with Atlanta's elite society. She had lost the only thing she truly cared about, her social status. On Monday morning, a crisp, merciless breeze swept through the affluent streets of Buckhead. Porch. Promptly at 8 a.m., a spotless fleet of white moving trucks pulled up to the wrought iron gates of my estate. Sitting in the chauffeured back seat, sipping freshly brewed espresso, I watched a Fulton County Sheriff's deputy hand the official corporate eviction notice to the bewildered private security guards at the front door. The legal injunction was absolute. Porch. The Apex Heritage Trust was reclaiming its property from trespassers. I stepped out of the car just as the heavy wooden front door was forced open. The eviction process was a masterpiece of mechanical precision. I had hired a top-tier corporate liquidation team, and they didn't move things with care. Porch. They bagged and boxed personal belongings with ruthless speed, clearing out the wreckage of a fraudulent life. Standing on the manicured front lawn, I watched contractors haul out the physical proof of my family's greed. Out came DeAndre's expensive golf clubs, bought with money he siphoned from our joint accounts. Porch. Out came imported Italian leather nursery furniture, ordered presumptuously by Jasmine and DeAndre for a child conceived in deception. Movers dragged heavy trash bags stuffed with DeAndre's custom-tailored suits, unceremoniously dumping them on the pristine sidewalk. The three of us, Harrison, Jen, and I, stood across the street, parked next to two government-issued black Ford Explorers, 2 U.S. Porch. Marshals in tactical vests and an ICE agent walked toward the upscale townhome where the Arandas had been renting since that aborted engagement dinner. Jen asked to come along personally. Not to speak, not to gloat, simply to witness it with her own eyes. Julio opened the door. He was still wearing yesterday's wrinkled shirt. Porch. I watched his face undergo a violent shift within seconds. From confusion to recognizing the uniforms, and finally to a realization bordering on absolute despair. The expression of a man who always thought he ran fast enough, only to find the bill had finally caught up to him. Porch. Julio Aranda, one of the marshals began. We have an out-of-state warrant for your arrest regarding interstate wire fraud charges out of Florida. The law enforcement officers explained matter-of-factly as they slapped the handcuffs on him. The recordings and Argentine background intel Jen gathered months prior had served as the catalyst for the Florida family to press charges. Porch. The case finally wound its way through the sluggish judicial system, culminating in these cold steel cuffs today. Additionally, the ICE agent added, due to your expired visa and fraudulent entry, the federal government has issued a detainer. Once your criminal case in Florida wraps up, deportation proceedings will follow seamlessly. Porch. The poised exterior he wore flawlessly through countless dinners, phone calls, and rehearsed apologies completely collapsed. He didn't argue, didn't struggle, and stopped performing entirely. He simply stood there, looking smaller than I had ever remembered. The false world he built on charm, lies, and calculated timing shattered right on his own rented porch under the crushing weight of reality. Porch. Valentina appeared behind him, screaming to distance herself before anyone even asked. I didn't know anything. Whatever he did, I had nothing to do with it. I'm just his mother, that's all. Ma'am, another agent said coldly, we have a few questions for you down at the station as well. I was just laughing at a joke. Her voice cracked slightly, rising in pitch. Porch. All I did that night was laugh. I remembered that laugh, perfectly, that ease, the sound falling as naturally as if she were in her own dining room. It was a rehearsed laugh, fully aware of what malice it endorsed. There was no confusion in that sound, and certainly no innocence. Now, she couldn't take that laugh back. Porch. Jen stood beside me, arms casually crossed over her chest, watching it all unfold in silence. I glanced at her, half expecting to see a flash of triumphant joy, or the release of the anger she carried the past few months. Instead, I saw something quieter and rock-solid. Porch. A woman who, entirely on her own strength, calmly dismantled and reassembled everything, standing now simply as a witness to the end. Julio looked up past the federal agent's shoulders, locking eyes with Jen across the short distance. Whatever he tried to find in her eyes, a shred of old affection, pity, or even anger, he found nothing. Porch. She looked at him the way you look at a vaguely familiar stranger. There was nothing left of him in her eyes. He was the first to look away. We stood watching as the thoroughly unglamorous, slow, procedural arrest played out. Throughout it all, my daughter didn't raise her voice once or shed a single tear. She won this war in a manner that was chillingly quiet. Porch. That evening, the silverware in our dining room was set exactly as it always had been. Maria's hands moved between the kitchen and dining room with the quiet rhythm she maintained for the past 15 years, as though the night that tore everything apart months ago had never disrupted the order of this house. Harrison, said Grace. Short, humble, and full of gratitude, just as he always did. Porch. Jen sat across from me, laughing softly at Harrison's, complaining about a stubborn construction contractor downtown. Her laughter felt different in my chest now. Lighter somehow, yet carrying a weight that wasn't there before. The gravity earned only after surviving that dinner. Maria placed a dish down steadily in front of her. Smooth as ever. Porch. Jen looked up, calling Maria by name and thanking her warmly, just as she always had. Nothing had changed between them. If anything, something ran deeper, an unspoken understanding neither needed to voice aloud. During the meal, I watched my daughter do something I had never seen her do before the ordeal. Her phone buzzed against the table surface, the screen lighting up. Porch. She didn't even glance down to see who sent the message, simply flipping the phone face down with a decisive motion, intentionally pushing it out of arm's reach before turning her full attention back to the table. It was a small action. She probably didn't even realize she did it. I noticed, though. Porch. I noticed the girl who once rushed to answer every vibration without thinking now consciously chose what deserved her attention and what did not every time her phone lit up. You're quiet, Mom. She caught my gaze and smiled. Just thinking, I said. Porch. I could have told her the truth. I was thinking about the naive girl who once wanted to see the best in everyone before they proved otherwise. I was thinking about the woman sitting across from me now, who could still see the good in people, but would never mistake that kindness for a baseline proof of character again. I kept those thoughts to myself. Porch. Some truths resonate more deeply kept quiet, inside than spoken aloud at the dinner table. I was just thinking about how far we've come since the spring, I answered finally. She smiled. There was no brokenness in that smile, nor the hardened cynicism born of hardship. Porch. It was the composure of someone after the dust settles, the maturity of a woman who learned precisely how much to invest, and in whom. Harrison reached across the table to squeeze her hand, just as he had hundreds of times before. For a second, it looked like any ordinary family dinner in this house. Warm, ordinary. The kind of evening you only realize the true cost of after almost losing it. Porch. I looked at my daughter across the table. She was steady, poised, completely herself. Yet she was sharper now, like a blade that reveals its true edge only after tasting blood. At that moment, I understood something I hadn't allowed myself to admit until now. She hadn't just survived the ordeal. She forged an entirely new self out of it. Torch. I spent my life trying to shield and raise her, never realizing I was actually preparing a true warrior for the dinner that changed everything. Following that dinner, to achieve her goal, she accomplished what I once thought impossible for her. And now, she was unstoppable.